So here's what I want you to do as we begin today. I want you to imagine something. Imagine that you lived some 3,000 years ago. That's when Psalm 8 was written. Imagine the world. To say that's vastly different really doesn't convey how different it was back then. If you lived 3,000 years ago, then in your mind, the earth was flat. Unfortunately, there's some people that have not advanced beyond that in our day and time. But you have thought that the earth was flat, that the sun rotated around the earth. You would have thought that the universe was simply that, the earth and the moon and the stars and the sun. That was it. Your life would have been lived in a very small area. You probably never would have ventured beyond an area the size of probably Lafayette County, if not a little bit more. You would have understood how fragile life was. You would have known that whether it was a drought or a swarm of locusts or an illness, that could end all life as you knew it. Your life from dawn to dusk consisted of one thing and one thing alone: survival. Doing what you needed to make sure you had to do to make sure that you, your family, maybe your expanded clan had the food that it needed for the day you were in, maybe the next day, maybe for the weeks ahead. That was the entirety of your existence 3,000 years ago. But when the sun went down and darkness crept in, your eyes would have been drawn to the heavens. No light, nothing in between you and the glory of the heavens. And you would have seen thousands and thousands of stars. You would have gotten to watch the moon move slowly through its phases. You would have got to watch with awe and amazement as meteors and comets streaked across the sky. You would have sat around the fire and told stories about the clusters of stars where you saw hunters or maybe fish or maybe birds living there among the stars, these points of life in the dome above you. You would have been amazed, drawn into awe in the majesty of the night sky. And 3,000 years later, 30 centuries later, the night sky has the same impact on us, doesn't it? We know a lot more than they did 3,000 years ago. We know that the earth is round. We can peer deep into the universe. We had someone a couple months ago that was able to image for us what a black hole looks like. We can put rovers on other planets. We've actually got one probe, Voyager probe, that's beyond the bounds of our solar system now. We have much more knowledge of what is above us and around us than we used to. But still, there's something that speaks to us when we're out in the darkness of night, beyond the lights of Oxford or whatever city that you're in, something that draws us out when we see the greatness and the vastness of the cosmos around us. And I think that's why Psalm 8 is so popular, because it speaks to that. Psalm 8 begins and ends with the same phrase, "O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth." It's as if everything in the middle of it, the writer of the psalm needs us to understand that everything is contained within the majesty of God, our Creator. But the power of the psalm for us really begins in verse 3. When we hear these words, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established." What are human beings that you are mindful of them? Mortals that you care for them. The psalmist understands that everything that they would have seen in the night sky, all of the vastness of the stars, the beauty of the moon, all of it was the handiwork of God. The psalmist was sure of that. The psalmist wanted to make sure that everyone understood that what we saw, this creative gift, was a gift from God. The vastness of it was a gift from God. But what happens is that in the midst of explaining and really offering up the praise for what God has done, a question comes to mind. An important question that I don't want us to miss or move too quickly past this morning. Here's the question. In the scope of everything that's so huge and wonderful and beautiful, the psalmist asks, what are human beings that you are mindful of them? Mortals that you care for them. Pay attention to how that question gets asked. What's the first word that he uses? It's not who are humans. What's the word? What what are humans? If someone came up to you today and asked you, well, what are you? How would you respond to that question? Probably not well, right? Sounds pretty demeaning for someone to call you a what? I think that's intentional. The psalmist chose that word to contrast us with this beautiful, vast handiwork of God in the night sky. Who are we? We're tiny and insignificant and feeble and fragile. Why in the world would God have anything to do with us when God could play with the sun and the stars and the moon and all that's there? Why would God have anything to do with us? And this is a significant question. I don't want us to rush past it to the answer to what the psalmist says about us, because I think the psalmist wants us to wrestle with the question, what are we? What are we in the scope of all of creation? What is there about us? Because we can feel small. I think what the psalmist is trying to do here is pull us in a direction that's not natural for us. The psalmist is trying to pull us away from maybe the weight of an understanding that's not truth for us, pulling us to the right lane. This past week, my family and I, we went somewhere where you had to drive on the left side of the road. Anybody ever been to a place where you had to drive on the left side of the road? You would think that it would be an easy switch, right? You're driving on the left side of the road. You don't want to die, so you drive on the left side of the road, right? It should be simple, but from the screams of my wife and children, I know that driving on the left side of the road, it's not natural. It's not what we do. There's this force that sometimes just driving down the road alone, I would feel it pulling me to the right side of the road. When we'd come to an intersection, instead of looking the way I needed to look to drive on the left side of the road, I'd look to the other way and pull out into oncoming traffic. There was a sticker on the middle of the windshield of our rental car that said "Stay left" with an arrow, and sometimes I would look through the sticker on the windshield as I pulled into the right lane, right? Because that's what's natural. That's how I've been trained over time. That's the pull of habit, the pull of life for me. And I think what the psalmist is trying to do when he asks the question, what are humans? He's trying to combat the natural pull of life for us, because there is a way that we see ourselves, a way that we're taught and trained to see ourselves, which is at odds with the truth of who we are and what we are in creation. The pull that we feel is a pull towards insignificance. It's a pull towards boredom. It's a pull towards routine. What happens in our lives is that the awe and the majesty of our world gets reduced to boredom and indifference and insignificance and routine. And what happens to us, the pull of life, is a pull to say that the daily grind that we go through, that's the only grind that there is. Life whispers a lie to us, that we're powerless, that life is small, that what we see with our eyes is all that there is. But what the psalmist wants us to understand is that there is something sacred and holy and large about the lives that we have been gifted with. Here's the way he answers the question. What are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Here's the pull back to the truth for us. He says, yet you have made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. Do you hear that? It's breathtaking. And what the psalmist says about us. We are more than our work. We are more than our age. We are more than our role in the family. We are more than our paycheck. We are more than our credit score. We are more than our habits. We are more than our greatest failure or our greatest success. Your life is significant. Did you hear what the psalmist said? You have been made by God to be a little lower than God. You have been crowned with glory and honor. You have been given dominion. What the psalmist is speaking to us, what the psalmist is screaming at us to understand, as in the scope of all creation, the scope of all that is huge and vast and beautiful, God has given us identity and status and dignity and authority and responsibility. We have been drawn in as co-creators to continue the work of God in the creation. God has extended His sovereignty to us and through us. We have been given significant dignity and significant responsibility in our world. It's not that we just get up and go to school or go to work and come home. Our lives are sacred and holy. Our lives have significant purpose. When you hear the whisper that your life doesn't matter, when you hear the whisper that your life is small, the psalmist speaks to us. The night sky speaks to us that our lives are something more, that we have something to offer, that we have dominion. I want to talk for just a second about that word dominion, because a lot of times the word dominion, we hear it as domination. We hear that we have been given the earth to exploit the earth, that the earth has been given to us, when what the psalmist really understands, and really it echoes Genesis chapter 1, we have been given as a gift to the earth. That's the way it talks about it here. We've been given stewardship over the earth. Whatever God would do with God's sovereignty and creative power, that's what we're called to do, to bring order, to create beauty, to care for, to tend to the earth. Not to waste it, not to tear it down, not to leave it worse than what we found it. We have been given responsibility, holy responsibility. And so I want to speak to two aspects of that responsibility this morning as we think about what it might mean to live this kind of life. A part of that responsibility that we've been given, that's been shared with us by God in our role in creation, is the role to care for creation, to take care of what we've been given. Some of you have family heirlooms, things that have been passed down to you, right? When you think of a family heirloom, it's something that's not yours. You don't own it. You only have it for a time, and your task with that heirloom is to do what? To make sure you care for it in a way that you can give it faithfully to the next generation. Our responsibility as we look at the world around us is to make sure that we're caring for creation in a way that we can hand it off to the next generation. We're called to make sure that we are caring for what has been gifted to us. I think that means we have to look at the issues of our world around us. We live in a day and time where we know them. We live in a time when we know what we are doing to the earth, good and bad. And so it means taking responsibility to be a part of the conversation of what does it mean that our climate is changing? What does it mean that people don't have the clean water that they need to drink? What does it mean that we're using up the aquifers in the Mississippi Delta? What does it mean that plastics, that our oceans are teeming with plastics? What is our responsibility to the earth around us? Right before we left on vacation, we were going to a place where we could see God's handiwork in the oceans. And it was beautiful. But right before we left, there was an article that came out, some research that was released. Some folks in California had sent probes down 3,000 feet beneath the surface of the ocean. Do you know what they found 3,000 feet below the surface of the ocean? Anybody know? They found plastic. And not only did they find microplastics floating in the ocean, they found plastic in all of the small creatures living inside them at the very bottom of the food chain. Plastics. Who's at the top of the food chain? We're at the top of the food chain. So what does that mean? Eventually, if not already, we're eating plastic. So what does it mean for us as followers of this God who has gifted us with dignity and responsibility to care for creation? It doesn't mean that we have to tackle all of it. It doesn't mean that we have to do everything. I think our responsibility is to do something. So that just as God looked and saw that it was good, that when we are handing off creation to the generations following us, we can look and say, it is still good. I think our responsibility extends, though, not just to the care of the creation that we see, but also to other humans. I think we've been given responsibility to name the dignity that God has gifted, not just to us, but to every human being. You have never seen a human being that is not someone who is a little lower than God. You have never seen an enemy, an opponent of yours, who is a little lower than God. You have never seen anyone, wherever you are, you have never seen anyone who has not been created as someone who is a little lower than God, given dominion just like you. I think part of our responsibility is to continue to raise up the truth that every human being has dignity gifted to them by God. Not dignity that they earn, not dignity that they have because of where they live or what they make or what they do, but dignity that's simply a gift of God. And I think it's our responsibility as children of God who understand dignity to be people, when we have conversations, lift up the dignity of other people. That means when we have conversations about immigration and refugees, whether that's at our southern border or in Costa Rica or in Sudan or Syria, that part of our leading of the conversation is to remind people that every person is a person of dignity. It means that when we disagree with someone, and if you are human and you are breathing, and that covers most of us in the room this morning, that means we remember that the people that we disagree with over real things, I don't want to diminish our disagreement sometimes, but that the person across the aisle from us is a child of God, given dominion, created just a little less than God. And allow that understanding to change how we approach the conversation, approach the argument, approach how we will see them. What if we understood that part of our sacred responsibility was simply to raise up the dignity of others around us? There's a young woman named Ana Luisa. She was a nursing school student. During the summer, she decided she would go and spend part of her summer in India in a medical clinic, working there, putting her skills that she was learning to good use. She got there, she found that this clinic was understaffed, it was under-equipped, it was flooded with more people than they could deal with. One of their patients was a little baby who was born, a little girl born with spina bifida and paralysis in both legs. She said that she noticed that the parents of this child, after the birth, stayed back. And she wrote to her pastor about her experience with this family and this child. She learned very quickly that one of the reasons the parents were staying back is that in a lot of parts of India, parents prefer males to females, little boys to little girls. And so this family didn't know what to do, not only with the child that was born, not a male but a female with significant disabilities. The other nurses there told Ana Luisa that they were concerned that the family would either in the night abandon the child there at the clinic, or worse, that they would take the child home and murder the child, leave the child somewhere to die. So Ana Luisa took it on herself to visit this child every day, to stand in front of the family, to touch the child, to brush the child's head, to speak to the child. A few days in, Ana Luisa asked if she could pray for the child. And so she stood before the child and prayed over the child using the name Jesus, knowing that the parents had no idea what she was praying over the child, but she wanted them to hear the name Jesus over and over. On the fourth day, the father came up to Ana Luisa and asked her to name the child. So Ana Luisa prayed and thought, and she named this little girl Gloria. because she wanted the parents to know that this child reflected the glory of God. Here's what she was doing in a small clinic on the far side of the world. She was reminding parents of the dignity of their unwanted child. What a gift she gave. What if our gift to the world around us was simply to speak words of dignity and status, to understand that the people around us and that the people other people talk about are children of God as well? Here's what I know. To deny the dignity of another human is to deny the sovereignty of God. But here's what else I know. To affirm the dignity of another human is to affirm the sovereignty of God. So what if we were about that, affirming the dignity of other humans so that we can affirm the sovereignty and the rule of God in our world? I believe this psalm, this question of what we are, I think it's something that we need to wrestle with. Maybe you need to wrestle with beyond just these 20 to 22 minutes today. So what if you did this? Let me give you this challenge, this work. What if tonight or tomorrow night you find a place far away from the lights of the city? You found a place where you could look up and you could truly see the stars and the moon. What if you marveled at the handiwork of God, but in that moment you wondered as well who you are and what God is calling you to do as someone who has been made a little less than God, someone who's been given glory and honor, someone who's been given dominion? What might you hear? What role might you step into? How might you allow God to use you as someone with dignity and sacred responsibility? Let's pray. God, forgive us for all the ways that we deny the good news of who you have created us to be. God, allow us to find the confidence and the courage to live out of the grand responsibility and authority that you have given to each one of us, to care for others around us and to care for the world that you have given to us. May we live faithfully as people who understand that we have been gifted dominion, that we have been offered some of your sovereignty, to live as people who create and care for all that you have created. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.